So we're going to be starting learning the hagahot. So Diba Masu Pasuk Liyol Tofrish and Ches. So as I explained last time, the way the Rabbi Rashab wrote the hagahot, they were written just with an indication of what line, where he wanted it interspersed. This particular hagahot, where it related to, and it was written just as hagahot Aleph, a list of hagahot. Some very short, just a few words, being just a reference to something, and some being a considerable amount of pages. When it was ultimately published, it was published to be interspersed with the original text from Torah Or. So that's how we learn it. We learn along with the Torah Or, and then when there's a hagahot of the Rebbe Rashab, we'll learn that hagahot. Now there are 34 hagahot in total, and in the context of the first ois of the Maimah, in the first ois of the Maimah, there are 4 hagahot. The first 2 are just references, but they're references. And then there are 2 longer hagahot, not incredibly long. And our goal is going to be to learn through the first ois with the 4 hagahot. Now, in a hagahot itself, there's sometimes a bracket with sort of a slightly more tangential point, a more indica point, a reference to other things, which sometimes, or most of the time, I'm going to skip. You can look over them afterwards, just in order to maintain the flow and not get caught up in a lot of tangents. And maybe learn it over again. You can learn it over with all of the extra nukudes. However, I'm going to be sometimes skipping parts. Obviously, I'll indicate where, in order to keep the flow of what's being said. Okay, because my fear is that if we focus on every single aspect of every single hagahot, we're going to struggle to make progress. And at the moment, it'd be good to be able to make progress so that we can complete all the 34 hagahot, if that's okay. Afterwards, in Chazara, you're welcome to look into those things, and I'm happy to answer questions. Okay, let's just start. Let's jump straight in. Pasuk Aliyol Antu Chad V'Lei V'Chushban Antu Da Apikas Asa Tikunin Chuli. So it's quoting from the Pasuk Aliyol from the Tikkun Isaiah, but not in order. Starts with the first thing and doesn't indicate that actually this is after Antu Chad V'Lei V'Chushban. There's a lot of other things until you get to Antu Apikas Asa Tikunin. So Aliyol begins and says, you are one. You're the type of one that isn't a counted one. You're not a one that comes before 2. You're a one and you're the only one. That's the type of one, not echad, more like yochid. And echad is like a yochid. But then it says, Antu da pikas asa tikunin. You are the one who brought forth 10 tikunin. We're going to be medayik a lot what the word tikunin means. Tikunin can mean tools. And as we're going to see, tikunin also means a type of levush, a type of clothing. But that's going to be a major topic in the first ois of the Maimah. Now, lahavin inyan zeh, this is now the Maimah of Torah Or. Lahavin inyan zeh, lama nikri yud sfiris b'shem tikunin. So we want to understand why are the esses sfiris of Atzilus called tikunin. And in order to understand why the esses sfiris of Atzilus are called tikunin, tzorich lahakdim bir inyan muhus hanefesh. We need first of all to preface an explanation of what is the muhus hanefesh. What exactly is the nefesh? And through understanding the nefesh, we can be able to understand the esses sfiris of Atzilus and why they are called tikunin. So this is a very important premise to start with, that we, from the idea of mipsari echzer lika, that from our flesh, from a person's flesh, they can perceive godliness, that the human experience, and is the method by which we can understand Nyanim Shalamayla. And that is a sort of axiomatic to all Limud Chassidus, that you start off with your own perceptible experience. There's a sort of a degree of there's a degree of acceptance that in Nyanim Shalamayla, in Nyanim which are Nyanim Ruchniim, are by definition very difficult to grasp and understand. Because the Geder of an Inyan Ruchni is something which isn't perceptible by the human senses. So the only things we have to go by are the things that we can actually perceive and grasp, and from them we can extrapolate. We can be mafshit the Inyan. We can take it out of its material example and get a sense of what the nimshal is. But our mode of understanding the nimshal is specifically through the mashal, through the human experience. And as we're going to see, we're going to gradually build up in various forms of human experiences. There are ranges of the human experience too. Some are more mugushim, some are more material, and some are more edel. The first premise of what the nefesh is the nefesh itself is what he calls an oid poshut, which has no division of seichel midis. So seichel midis, for lack of a better term, is the personality of the soul. A person's personality is defined by their seichel midis. But the nefesh, mitzad atzma, has no personality. It's poshut. Just like you use in usual terms. When you say someone's poshut, what are you really saying? It's usually said in a rather derogatory way. When you say someone's a bit of a poshut person, you're saying they lack personality. They're underdeveloped. They don't have so many facets. If you think a facet is like a face, it's a specific depiction of that person. So a person is multifaceted. They have a wide range of personality. Then they're not poshut. It's the opposite of poshut. Poshut is something which isn't murkav. It isn't made up of other things. It's not divisible, and it's not definable. Divisible miloshen hischalkus, and definable miloshen hagdara. Doesn't have a geder to define it in distinction from something else. And obviously, divisibility and definition are two intertwined concepts in this regard. If there's ischalkus, there can be hagdara, hagbala. They all work together. Hagahot. And so here the Rebbe Rashab gives a tzion. He writes Kamisha Kosta B'Seif Shalbein in Perik Nun Aleph. He references Perik Nun Aleph in Tanya. So Perik Nun Aleph in Tanya is the beginning of the end of Tanya, Likutei Amorim. So the last three parakim of Likutei Amorim that begins in Perik Nun Aleph, and there the Alter Rebbe is recapping and going back to a point that he had made earlier in Perik Lamed Hey. Perik Lamed Hey, he had brought Lashon HaZayar, that a person has to always be careful about never going around. The Lashon of the Zayar is going around Dalad Amos with nothing on your head. So the Zayar explained that this refers to that the Shekhinah is Sheira. The Shekhinah is Meir. There's a Hashrois HaShekhinah. There's a sort of a Gilui of Alikus on every single person. And it gives a moshel of it being like a flame. So the person, specifically the Guf HaAdam, is like the wick. The Shekhinah, the Gilui Alikus, is the Eish. And the oil, which fuels the whole thing, is Maisa HaMitzvahs. And so the beginning of Perik Nun Aleph, he comes along and he explains B'chlal the inyan of Ashras HaShekhinah. How is in the Beis HaMikdash, how is in my person. So starting off, he wants to explain how it is in the person. And first of all, what is the person? So he has a lashon there. The lashon of the Tanya Nun Aleph, Perik Nun Aleph, is that all of this, his chalkus, all of these keiches hanefesh that a person has, a person's seichel, a person's middays, they are not the nefesh itself. Why? Because the nefesh itself is an etzem echad ruchni, poshut, umufshut mikol tzir gashmi. You can't say that the nefesh is chochma, is chesed, is das, is gevura, is any of these keiches. You can't say that the nefesh is re'iyah, the nefesh is shmiyah. It doesn't have any of these qualities. Why? Because the etzem nefesh is an etzem echad ruchni poshut umufshut mikol tzir gashmi. It's a lashon Tanya in Perik Nun Aleph. And as I mentioned to you, it's kedai to look in the Shirim B'Sefer Tanya especially the long ha'ara of the Rebbe, the Rebbe's ha'ara is not so long, but the way Rabbi Weinberg explains the Rebbe's ha'ara to get a better understanding of what it's saying over there. But the Pashtus, the Rebbe Rashab over here, by referring to Perek Nun Aleph, is referring to this point that the nefesh mitzad atzma is an eir poshut. And the nefesh mitzad atzma doesn't have any of this chalkos seichel midas. There's no character, there's no personality to the etzema nefesh, as we understand it. So weiter in the Maimon of Torah Eir, v'haseichel v'hamidlis shelo heim bechinas levushim lenefesh. So the seichel and midlis are not the nefesh itself. Rather, they are levushim to the nefesh. They are garments to the nefesh. They are dressings to the nefesh. Shahan nefesh yesh la seichel midis. The pshat is that the nefesh has seichel midis, but the seichel midis are not the nefesh. But rather, the nefesh has these levushim, these externality, these things, these external expressions of itself. But they are not the very core and essence of what the nefesh is. And again, the Rebbe Rashab gives another Marimakim. He says, so, in Likutei Torah Parshat Vayikra, there's a beer to the Maima V'leis Ashbis, which is Kedai to learn over there. What is the Nakudah from over there? I just want to quote from there, what I think is the key quote that he wants to refer to. So it says there in Likutei Torah that Kamoi Shahamayach Agashmi Hirak Kli L'Koyach HaSeichel V'HaChochma HaMispashit Me'anefesh. So just like a human brain is clearly not the nefesh, a human brain is not chochma. The human brain is a kli to seichel and chochma. It's a means by which seichel and chochma can be niskala. It's a kli, but it's not seichel. You wouldn't call the chayma hamayach, the physical matter of the brain, you won't call it seichel. It's just matter. But it's a kli. So kach al derech zeh koyach ha-seichel sheben-nefesh hu rak kli lemuhus v'atzmis ha-nefesh. So if we go up a level, here we got three components. We've got the nefesh itself, we've got the koyach ha-seichel, and we've got the human brain. So if we talk about the relationship between the koyach ha-seichel and the human brain, then from the human brain's perspective, the koyach ha-seichel is like an etzah. Is like a thing in itself, which is going to become a lubish in it. So, in that relationship, the mayach hagashmi is just a kli. But if we move up and we talk about the relationship between the koyach haseichel and the etzem hanefesh, then similarly, the koyach haseichel becomes just like a levush, just like a kli. So, kachal derech zeh koyach haseichel sheben nefesh hu rak kli lemuhus va'atzmius hanefesh. Avol lo yisha haseichel hu mimuhus va'atzmius hanefesh. So that's the key point he's trying to make over there, or what I believe the Rebbe Rashab is trying to refer to, is that the koyach haseichel sheben nefesh is not the nefesh. It's an aspect of the nefesh. It's a revelation of the nefesh. It's a reference to the nefesh. It's a kli to the nefesh. So we're going to go as far. We're going to call it. It's al derech atikun to the nefesh. It fixes the nefesh. We're going to talk about. It improves the nefesh, but it's not the nefesh, because the nefesh is an oir poshut etzem echad ruchni poshut umufshe mikol tzir gashmi. Okay. Now, also in the Maimah there has the Machlekes Namar Miprog and the Rambam. This may be good to look at. He also brings a raya over there, which we're going to talk about a bit later in the Maimah itself. But he brings there the argument of why can the nefesh not be? Why is the seichel not the nefesh? Because we see that there are shinuyim in the seichel. A child understands only so much, and an adult understands more. And even within adults, there's a range. And within a person individually, there's a development of seichel. So seichel changes. So there's the inyan of shinuyim. Once you have shinuyim, it's a raya, it's a proof that it's not the etzem. Because the etzem built in mishtana. The essence doesn't change. But we're going to talk about that a lot more in the further hagos.
We're going to talk about that, about the same thing about Keser. Rotzin, that we spoke about in the Maimon Vayikra. He brought two things, the Seichel and the
Rotzin, yeah. So
well.
even by Rotzin. No, it's not relevant. We're talking about Esses first, we're not talking about Rotzin at the moment. But there, you're right. In the Maimon there, it mentions the issue, that issue. Now, it's also very interesting, similar to what it says over here in our Maimon. It says in that interesting notion, it says, when they get to what it says in Tanya, in Perik Gimel, in Perik Yud Beis, it suggests, it says in that those parts of Tanya, it's chosser. It's lacking there. Meaning you might get the impression from Perik Gimel in Tanya that the Keiches HaNefesh, the Seichel HaMidas, are actually the Nefesh, the Etzem HaNefesh. Because we say in Perik Gimel, V'kach HaNefesh ha'adam shenechlekes l'shtayim Seichel HaMidas. The Seichel itself is split into two. And we say in Perik Yud Beis that Muhus v'atzmus HaNefesh l'kishein esebich ha'nisah, as if it's exactly the same thing. And it seems to so the lashon of the Likutei Torah there is chasser. And here also now we're going to see it references to it talks about those parts of Tanya. Umasha koser b'Tanya shanefesh atzmi mischalekes seichel u'midas. That's Perik Gimel. Shehem nikroim atzmi hanefesh. That's Perik Yud Beis. Ein ze ele legabi machshav dibur ma'aser. So the way he explains it is, why does it say over there? It's not chasser. It's talking there in a context of its relationship to machshava dibur ma'aser. Shein levushim nifradim mamish mimos hanefesh. That the machshava dibur ma'aser, which we're going to talk about again as well at length, is a completely distinct type of levush to the nefesh than the keiches hanefesh. A person has eser keiches hanefesh, and they also have gimel levushim machshava dibur ma'aser. So broadly, you always got to remember that when we're talking about pshitus and harkova, we're talking about pshitus and ischalkus, or however you want to define this dichotomy, this binary. We're always talking in a relative sense, one thing relative to another. That, like I mentioned, the letter of the Rebbe in Igros Kodesh Chelik Gimel Amud Lamed Aleph, the Rebbe talks about how the only thing you can say is Poshet is the Eibush himself, Atzmus U'Muhus. Everything else is ultimately going to be going to lack in some type of pshitas, because it's always got to come from somewhere. So by coming from somewhere already gives you a bit of form and identity. It's a bit of character of sorts. You have to be murka from at least two things: yourself and the thing you come from. Only the Eibush doesn't come from anywhere. He can only Eibush is achdus pshuta. So whenever we're talking about these things, we're talking about, and we're going to be skipping between various different sort of pairings. So when we talk about the pshittas of something, it doesn't always mean, and most predominantly doesn't mean, something that is fundamentally poshut, but something that is poshut relative to something else. So when we talk in Perik Gimel and Perik Yud Beis Tanya about the division that seemingly the nefesh is the seichel and midas of the nefesh are described as the etzem nefesh. There it's saying in relation to the machshav dibur ma'aser, they're like the atzmius of it. There's mufshut mikot tziyum. They're so murkav, machshav dibur ma'aser. They're such levushim nifradim. Then the seichel and midas looks like the etzem itself. But if we then go a bit more if you're looking at in a broader character, if you go more microscopically, and you take the keiches hanefesh, legabi the etzem hanefesh, it's still only levushim. It's not the etzem itself. So when it says in Perik Gimel and Perik Yud Beis that it's the atzmis hanefesh, ein ze ele legabi machshava dibur ma'aser, sheim levushim nifradim mamish mimuhus hanefesh. They are levushim nifradim. This term levushim nifradim is going to be the main topic of the next Hagah. We'll let the Hagah speak for itself. Which he says, shehem bechinas biyah, so he brings in all of the collective things. And now, if we're talking about it in Olam as Lamaila, just like we're talking about the Esespheres, the Atzilus, we say are comparable to the Esakeichs HaNefesh. So the Esakeichs HaNefesh are a moshel on the Esa Spheres Atzilus. The Machshava de Mumaisa are a moshel, the human Machshava de Mumaisa are a moshel for Eilamas Bria Yitzir and Asiyah. Again, something we're going to expound upon a lot as the Maimon continues. Shal Zeh Omar Levushim Tkinas Loin Chuli the Inun Bia. That's why it says further in the Pasach Eliyol that he fixed the name Levushim, and there it's a reference to Eilamas Bia. Aval HaSeichel v'Hamidus Ima Yoshem B'chinas Levushim. Now these Seichel and Midas we also call Levushim. However, Einam Levushim Nifradim Mamish, but they aren't the same type of Levushim as Machshava de B'Maisa. Elakmoy B'chinas Kelim Da'atzilus De Iyu V'Gamu Ichad. But these are not. These Levushim are really like Kelim, the Kelim of Atzilus, of which it says that the Eibush and the Kelim are one, the Kelim of Atzilus. Okay, so we've just brought in a lot of important points, said very bekitzer, and now we're going to have the third Hagah, which is going to give it a lot more elaboration. Won't worry too much. We can come back to that formulation at the beginning after we've been through a lot of the Maimah, and it will make a lot more sense, and it will be a bit more meaningful. Okay, so this Hagah, as Hagahs go, it's not particularly one of the longest. It's going to take you till I think the top of Amud Hay, just so you know where we're going. This is a pretty short one. But as I say, I'm going to skip quite a bit of this. There's a whole section that I'm going to skip, and we'll start. We'll see what else, how our speed goes. I mentioned to you that a good reference, a good way of learning this Hagah and also the next Hagah is the Maimah of Ha'evan Azois in Ein Beis. In Hemshech Ein Beis, which was actually said in Ein Gimel, Pashas Vayetzi Ein Gimel. It's Perek Kuf Daled, from Perek Kuf Daled in Hemshech Ein Beis. And there it spells out very, very nicely. The unit references are Maimah here. Yeah, that's right. So you can see in footnote 14. Seif Amud Reish Ve'elach. Yeah, so you can see it in there. And obviously the Rebbe's Maimah V'Nacha that comes afterwards. These are two key references to find your feet about things that are being said over here. I want to bring out two things from a few things from that Maimah, just from the Ein Beis. That isn't spelt out so much over here, that can be helpful. So first of all, the way he defines Levushim Nifradim, separate Levushim that are separate, and then he's talking about actually physical clothes. He says, Kol inyonom hu lehiskasis behem. The whole purpose of clothing is to be covered up by them. Ulahaste atzmei, and to hide oneself min hazulas. The whole point is because of azul. The reason you wear clothes is because of other people. For yourself, you don't need to wear clothes. Clothing is a means by which you hide yourself from other people. And he says, but even and at times it could be from other things. It could be from the cold. But the cold is also external to you. It's not you. Because of the cold, you cover yourself up. As you see, when it's warm, people don't cover themselves up so much. So that's the first thing. And therefore the levush is not based on the person. A person's clothing is determined by the external thing that it's that you're hiding yourself from. It's something that's entirely mibachutz, right? It's not something that's an insight he says about a levushim nifradim. Whereas levushim hamyuchadim, a levush which is attached. Meaning, an example he's using is the body. The physical body is attached to the soul. The person's, at least you're going to see their animation, their aliveness. He says, "Kol inyan haguf." What is the whole point of the guf? Is the opposite. Is li'isiskalus eir hanefesh v'lifel al yodei gam b'dover shechutz mihem. The whole purpose of the body is not to hide the neshama. The whole purpose of the body is to reveal the neshama and enable it to have an impact outside of itself, to bring the eir hanefesh even into the elam hagashmi. Because as we know, the nefesh mitzad atzma is inyan ruchni. Even the keiches hanefesh are inyanim ruchni. In order for them to be able to have an impact, they have the guf. So the guf is not there to hide it. The guf is there to reveal it. So he says there that, as you see, that even when someone's not moving, you can tell they're alive. The guf is megala chayas. The guf shows that someone is alive. It reveals life. It doesn't hide it. Even if they're asleep, they're still. It reveals it.
The guf has no mishalkus.
What?
That what the Vashim Yichud is?
No.
No, it could be.
That's not what levush. Wait, I just told you. A levush yuchad is a levush which entirely reveals the thing which is mislabish in it. That was the first definition. The difference between a levush nifrad and a levush yuchad is the levush nifrad hides the thing inside it, that's enclosed in it, whereas the levush yuchad reveals the thing that is enclosed in it. And its example was clothing, begodim, and the guf, the contrast. So there are two nekudas, I think, from the Maimah. One is that the difference between levush yuchad and levush nifrad is the levush yuchad becomes misachid with the etzem. The levush yuchad becomes so attached to the etzem. When I say the etzem, etzem is the pshat, the thing that is mislabish in it. It's just a term for the thing that's being mislabish in it. That they are indistinguishable. There is no point where you say this is the melubash, this is the malbush, that you can distinguish between one and the other. They become fundamentally the same. This is this is the nakuda that's going to be in the rabbits. This is the two nakudas from the hagahot, the first hagahot, that I want you to be alert to. And the second thing is that whereas the levush nifrad is not. You can take it off, take it on, take it off, put it in the cupboard. Doesn't need to be attached to the thing that is being mislabish in it. And the second nakuda is that in the levush yuchad, the etzem, or the thing, whatever the thing is that's being mislabish in it, is able to be active. The levush activates the thing being mislabish in it, in the levush yuchad. The function of the levush yuchad is to activate the thing, and so it's to such an extent that the thing that is the etzem, which is mislabish in the levush, is mispol from it, is affected by it. So it's a two-way street. So there's an impact that levush has on the nefesh, on the thing that's mislabish in it. Okay, so those are just bechlolos, what we're going to get out Bez Hashem from this hagah. Let's dive in. Dehine belevushim yes beis minei levushim. When it comes to garments, there are two types: what we call a levush hanifrad or levush hamechuba. The levush which is separate, and the levush which is detached, and the levush which is attached. Just like we see in physical clothes, they are detached and separate from the etzem. To mean the etzem, it means the thing that is mislabish in them. And that's why a person is able to change his clothes from one item of clothing to another item of clothing. Because there is no intrinsic connection and attachment between the clothes and the person. It's just that the person wears them and becomes covered by them, hidden by them. Which is not the case when you talk about the type of levush which is attached, such as haguf, for example, the body. The guf is not the nefesh; it's only a levush to the nefesh. We say that the nefesh is enclosed in the guf. Where do we see this from? It's a pasuk. It's a pasuk in Eiyov. So we talk about the way the nefesh is mislabish in the guf. But even though it's not the guf, separate from the guf in a certain sense, because it's only a levush, when the nefesh is mislabish in the guf, they become misachid, they become united. Skip that bracket. 4 or so lines. So you can't take it off and put on a different body, as much as many people would like to. You can't change your body so simply. Zeguf is a nefesh, and as long as the nefesh is melubish in the guf, there's no point where you can say this is guf and this is nefesh. They become indistinguishable from each other. And it's specifically only when you have both of them together that you have the notion, the name Adam, a man with a capital M, a human being. A human being is not a guf. A human being is not a nefesh. A human being is a nefesh which is milubish in a guf. The hanefesh bifnei atzmai, because when you have the nefesh by itself, it's not called an Adam. It's nikra nefesh ha'adam. The haguf nikra b'sar ha'adam. As separate entities, they're distinguishable. Ukshemu yachad haguf hanefesh oz nikra Adam. Only when they're together, you call a person an Adam. Skip the bracket. Umikol ze muvan shehaguf misyachid hanefesh. V'lochein hanefesh poyeles b'haguf umispaeles mimikri haguf chuli k'moishis b'ay. So here he makes these two. He makes what I consider to be the two main nekudas he's making here. First is haguf misyachid hanefesh. Point 1. And point 2 is the guf is hanefesh poyeles b'haguf, which is like two parts of the same point. Hanefesh poyeles b'haguf umispaeles mimikri haguf komoi sheyisbay. This is going to be explained. We're not going to hold up. And actually, a lot of this is going to be explained in the next hagah. The point he's making over here is actually going to be made primarily in the next hagah.
Mimikri means parts of?
Mimikri, the happenings of the guf.
Like mikra.
Right. So that is like sort of an underlining point. Because they're moving shaguf misyachid hanefesh, chen hanefesh poeles b'aguf mispaeles mimikri haguf. Okay. Ba'adimyum is a yuvan l'mayla. He already now is going out from the mashal and going into the nimshal. So you can be medama how this is l'mayla too. The zewa hefresh ben kelim la'oisius bichlal. Because again, we're talking about the levush hamayuchad of the guf is a mashal for the there's a few stages. You've got the levush hanifrod, poshet begodim. Lagabi, the guf, which is the levush hamayuchad. Okay, go up another step. The guf is a levush hanifrod, and the keiches hanefesh are levush hamayuchad. Right? And that's, then you have in the nimshal, the Esses, Sfiras, the Atzilus, are like a levush hamayuchad, whereas machshava dibur maisa are like a levush nifradim. Okay? They're all about moving parts. So now he's going to say, this is how you can understand where it is l'mayla, the zohar hefresh ben kelim la'oisiyus bichlal. that you can understand this in the way that we have a broad distinction between what we call kalim and what we call asiyos. The shneihem heim levushim. That both kalim is a concept of a levush. A keli contains something inside of it, something mislabish inside of it. It's got, a keli has a connotation of a levush. And oisius also have a connotation of a levush. Oisius, in the most simple sense, when we talk about oisius hadibur, for example, they are a kli and a levush to the eir haseichel or the eir hamidus, whatever is being expressed in the person's speech. So we have a notion of it being a levush. The shneim heim levushim, mikol mokim, kelim heim levushim mechubarim, shemis achadim ima'oi. Skip the brackets. Right at the top of the next page, and Gimel. Ubechinas ha'isiyos shem levushim the machshava debu ma'isa. Skip the brackets. Heim levushim nifradim. So your the kalim. When we use the term kalim, specifically the kalim of Atzilus, we're referring to things that are levushim miyuchadim, mechubarim. Yeah. Levushim mechubarim doesn't use the Rebbe use the miyuchadim. Anyway, whereas asiyos are levushim al derech the machshava debu ma'isa. So what did we say? What was the difference before? We said levushim nifradim are ma'ilem u'master. On the thing is mislabish b'seicha. Whereas levushim yuchadim, like kalim, are megala.
This is going to be interesting.
Yeah. No, so if you remember in Lulav Arav and Ranat, he makes this point very clear that kol inyan of Oisius is to be ma'ilem master on the own. It's ma'ilem master legamri, to the point where a person who is like a code. If you don't know what the thing is, if someone's not a chacham mikvar, he'll have no clue what you're talking about.
At the same time, it says it in Yoni legalis, right?
It's bishvil azulas. The only way it's bishvil azulas is by being ma'ilem master legamri ala'ei. The Oisius.
So this is talking about how it does its job.
It's its function. Yeah.
It's not saying what the purpose of it is.
We're not getting that at the moment. No, we're saying what are its techunos, what are its characteristics. The characteristic of levush nifrod is to be ma'ilem master on the thing which is mislabish b'seichei, which is what Oisius do. And kalim's function is to be megala. Is levush yuchad is to be megala, that which is mislabish b'seichei, and the lashon was to make it active. Like the thing should be able to be poyel al yodai. Now, now, as we know very well from Ranat, that everything is Asius at every level, and all the kalim is just another term for Asius. So one second, how can you make this distinction between kalim and Asius? Asius exists on every single level. If there's nothing is niskala without Asius. So how can we say this is the broad distinction? The kalim are levushim yuchadim, mechubarim, and asiyos are levushim nifradim. We see that even the kalim of Atzilus are also called asiyos. Ukumei shem is the ab sag chuli, shem abu b'kriya chachma, v'shem sag b'bina, that we have from these notions in Kabbalah of the different tzirufim of Shem Havaya. And Shem Havaya is in Atzilus. And so the tziruf of Shem Havaya, the way it is in Shem Ab, that's in Chachma Atzilus. Shem Sag is in Bina Atzilus. So we have an inyan of Oisios, Shemis, even in Atzilus. So why are we claiming that Dafkis, the Kalim are like this and Oisios, that there's this distinction of Kalim and Oisios? How does it work? So Yishleimar, the Oisios Yesh Beis Madrigas. That when we say Oisios, there are different levels of Oisios. Broadly speaking, there are two Madrigas in Oisios. So in the Maim B'chu Kaisai, in the Kutei Teira Dapim Heim Dalet, says a bunch of things. Let's just have a recap a little bit of what it says over there. So he says there that the Oisios of machshava and dibur are like a completely foreign thing to the nefesh. They're mamash levushim nifradim. The nefesh mitzvah has no shaykhs to these things called these oisius of machshav and dibur. The way oisius of machshav and dibur, even machshav, not just because sometimes you say dibur is a levush nifrad because it's separate, right? Whereas machshav is levush yuchad. That's one level. But broadly speaking, even both machshava and dibur are both completely foreign things to the nefesh, and they're like a levush. However, they're still attached to the nefesh. And he gives a moshel over there like letters that are written with ink. So letters that are written in ink on top of cloth are, whilst they're completely different material from the cloth. The ink and the cloth are different material, right? But they're dvukim, they're attached. But under the same point is the davar noisaf to the etzem. The cloth is separate, is fundamentally of another thing. But when you have these oisius, these oisius amachshava, these dibur, they're still attached to the cloth. They're not the same thing as the cloth, but they're attached to the cloth. Right? And he says, but then there's another level of oisius, what he calls machshava ilo'ah. Yeah? And this machshava ilo'ah he describes as when you're thinking about a concept, but you're not thinking about the oisius of the concept. You're not thinking about the words of the concept, the way this concept is described. You're thinking about the nekudas haseichel. And the way it describes it is like the letters come automatically. It sort of it flows, but it's not. That's not the hagahot. That's not what you're focusing on. That's what you're thinking about. You're not thinking about the letters. You're thinking about the concept. So those are oisius already that they're sort of shining oisius. They're still having impact. And so that would be that the oisius are not being mailam or master at all. They're not concealing the concept. The concept is niskala al yidei these oisius. This machshava ilah. There's not even so much of a distinction between the oisius. You're not thinking through it in a methodical fashion, in a way that there's the point in words. You're thinking about the concept. Doesn't mean that there aren't oisius, but the oisius are not. I haven't got to vismokim. Just like when we were describing Ranat about oisius, l'mayla, the oisius become much more edel. That already between machshava and dibur, normal machshava and dibur, there's a huge difference. The edelkeit of the oisius. What it takes a few moments to think about takes a lot longer to speak out. But even in machshava, you can have a moment where the main focus is not the oisius shabbatava. But then, Vait in that Maimah, he also says that this is not. So why are we bringing these mashal? He's trying to bring a mashal of these distinct levels. You know what we're distinguishing over here. So he says that it's not really the real way of distinguishing between the oisius. If we want to have oisius which are nifradim and oisius which are miyuchadim, he gives an example of the tzir ha'oisius, the form of the oisius and the pronunciation of the oisius, the sound of the oisius, which those have nothing to do with. Those really have nothing to do. They're not inyan api seichel, right? They're l'mayla min ha-seichel. So they haven't got this hagbola. They're sort of they have a different relationship with the etzem. He says those when we say the oisius are mushrish and etzem hanefesh, what part of the oisius? The tzuras oisius, the mivta oisius, the nekudas oisius. And he says that's like oisius hachakukis. And this is the distinction we're going to bring over here. The difference between oisius haksiva and oisius hachakukis. You have engraved letters. The relationship between the letter and the material it's engraved in is that they become one. There's no the letters. The letters are the stone in which they're engraved in. Oisius hakika. What we're trying to say, the point about oisius hakika is not we're looking at two different. we're trying to emphasize how there can be a type of thing which we call osius. But what we mean by that is we mean something that is fundamentally attached to the etzem, the thing that's mislabish in it, and not something that is separate from the thing that's mislabish in it. Osius amachshava v'adibur or osius nifrodim. There's a musuk of having osius, an aspect of osius which is mechubarim, yuchadim. And so when we want to distinguish between atzilus and olamus biyah, we initially said that's the difference between kalim and osius. But if you also want to say osius to they call the kalim also osius, then you have to understand we're talking about different types of osius. So distinction between osius. Yeah? So let's see what he says. Back inside the hagahot. It's worth looking over there. But hefresh bein osius hachakika la osius aksiva bichlal. The osius hachakika hein osius atzmiyim. V'hainu shahagilui hu ha'etzem. Sha'etzem misgalekach. Osius aksiva him doven neisaf ala klaf. V'hainu shema'alimim yoyse ad shahagilui hu rak chitzeniasai. So that is the difference. Osius hachakika. You take a piece of stone, you carve out a letter in it. Then what do you see? You see stone. The stone becomes a letter. Whereas when you write on a cloth, the cloth doesn't become a letter. Underneath the ink, there's white cloth. Doesn't transform the cloth. The cloth remains a white cloth. So davar noisef on the cloth. The letters don't become the cloth. They're attached to the cloth, but they're not the cloth. It's not like the lashon it says here. Shehagilui hua etzem. So what is niskala in an engraved letter? The stone is niskala in a different way, in that particular format. Now, you see there's a bracket here. Muvur sham. This bracket doesn't have a clear ending. It's unclear where it ends. And it goes to this Shuli Hagilyin, or the Ein Sarich Lahatik, the thing at the bottom of the page where it says V'ayim Mashkos B'ger Zakidish. So that continues from at the bottom of the page. See, Bechinas Chitzonius, you have the star. Yeah. Then it goes to the bottom.
Shuli ends at Bob the room.
No, because that's a different bracket. That starts at V'hainu. So let me explain to you what happens. You've got the Umavua. The Umavua continues down. Yeah. So Umavua is the beginning of the paragraph, the bracket. It goes down to Chitzonius where there's a star that takes you to a note which the Rebbe Shab don't ask not to be copied. Right. Masha Kosov. And that goes all the way the next page to the bottom where it says V'tzarchim l'tavichse. Can you see that on the bottom of page Vav? Sorry, the page Dalid. Okay. That is the end of that is the suggestion where the end of the bracket is. So where I'm going to take you, we're going to skip that bracket, and we're going to go to the last word on the page of Amud Gimel V'hinei. It's worth looking at that bracket, and it's a very interesting luchos to change luchos achreinis, but we're not going to look at that now. Okay, V'hinei, V'hinei ke'inyan ha'hefresh bein esis ha'chakika la'esis ha'ksiva b'klal. So this general difference between engraved letters and written letters. You can make another distinction of different types of oisius aksiva, where you have oisius shemis achtima etzimu megalim chuli for oisius nifradim. You have some types of letters which reveal the thing that's enclosed, the ideas that are enclosed inside them, and there are oisius which are separate, which conceal the ideas inside them. But in Yesh Laima, so he explains it as follows: the Zewa Hefresh bein Oisius to Teresh Bechsava, Oisius to Teresh Balpeh. This is also in the Maimon of the Beer of the Bechuk Kaisai. That this is the difference between the letters that you have in the written Torah and the letters you have in the oral Torah. The Teresh Bechsav, Oisius Ein Bediktuk. The letters that you have in Teresh Bechsav are very exact. Ushiyove ha'oir ba'oisius v'tevis elu davka u'v'chasa v'yasik the and you have to make sure that every single letter is exactly and word is written exactly the right way, nothing with not any extra, and when you have the words which are when.
I told you I had a Zoom at 7:45.
So you can't have. You have to make sure that sometimes when you have the extra vav, it should be yasser, and sometimes when it doesn't have it, it has to be chasser. These all have to be clear and exact. That is what's necessary in a Torah shebichsav. Because the letters are what we're describing here. These are letters which are misachidim ha'etzem. V'gam betzir ha'oisiyos. Also in the writing of the letters, how they should be designed. They should be written exactly in a certain style. Sheyimutsuyarim ba'ofen kozeh davke, in a very exact way. Aleph tumunasi beis yudin v'kav be'emsa machabron yachad. How do you make an aleph? You have to make two yudin with a vav. Ubeis tziyur gimel kavim, whereas a base has three lines. Udalet vav v'chein kol ha'isiyos. And the same with all the letters. Sheish kol echad tziyur meyuchad. V'hu lefi ofen ha'oi. Why do they all come in this particular shape? It all depends on the particular oir which is being nimshach al yodam. Ukumuvu b'sifrei Kabbalah. So there's in the Sifrei Kabbalah, it's Meirich about the different shapes of the letters. So we see that in Torah shebichsav sorich liyas nichtav ba'oisiyos elu b'dikduk davke. You have to have these letters in this way and exactly this way, and you can learn so many dinim and halachas just from a small thing, right? Because the oisiyos are exact, they're mechuven, and these are descriptions of oisiyos which are meyuchad with the thing which is mislabish in them, the Eira Torah, which is mislabish in these oisiyos. When it comes to Teresh B'Al Peh, in the Negea oisiyos. The B'Al Peh is not so much in the Negea with the oisiyos at all. You can say a concept in all different ways. It doesn't matter, you can write in Rashi oisiyos. When it comes to Teresh B'Chsav, the letters are Levusha Mechuba, and have all these qualities which we describe. What is the quality of a Levusha Yuchad? That it's Misachidim It becomes one and the same thing as the thing which is mislabish in it. Indistinguishable and indivisible from the thing that is mislabish in it. Just like the guf and the nefesh, that you can't say which is guf and which is nefesh. So too in the Oisiyos HaTorah of Teresh B'Chsav, similarly. They have the similar quality, like you would describe to Oisiyos HaKukos. But here we're saying we're bringing this distinction within Oisiyos HaKsiva Gufa. You can make a distinction. And that's why they have to be exact. So they should be kalim for this own. When it comes to those they aren't miyuchat. They're nifradim. They conceal the concepts. They're not one and the same thing as the concept. You could have different oisiyos for different for the same concept. They enclose the concept, and then through hard work, a person can unpack those words and figure out. And in Teresh B'Al Peh Gufa, you can make a chiluk between the Mishnah and the Gemara, right? The Mishnah is closer to the oisiyos mechuvanis. That they contain the oir. The oir is much more meir begilu in them. The Gemara can make a difference in Talmud Yisham, Talmud Avli. It doesn't matter. As long as you have the concept of what these differences are, the levush hanifrod, einim is achidim ha'etzem, and is mailim master ala etzem. Remember, I'm using the term etzem to describe the thing which is mislabish in them, not any particular thing about etzem of anything in particular. In some contexts, the etzem would mean the eira seichel, might mean the keichas nefesh. It might mean your hand in a glove. The thing that's mislabish in the thing is called the etzem, right? So the levushim nifradim are mailim u'master ala etzem. Levushim ha'misachdim, levushim ha'mechubarim, levushim ha'miyuchadim. They are megala that etzem. And they are misachidim ha'etzem. They become indistinguishable from the etzem. They're be'ein areich legabi the etzem, but they're still able to be misachid of that. Okay? V'zeh yuvan ha'hefresh ben kelim shein gam kein oisius ubein oisius machshav de u'maisa shnikroim levushim. So now we can distinguish this difference which we wanted to say before between kelim and oisius. That even though kelim are also called oisius, they're fundamentally different types of oisius. The oisius are chakukos, and not like the oisius of machshav de u'maisa, which are levushim sheim levushim nifradim mamish. Omnam bechinas ha-kelim nikroim gufin legabi levushim. These kelim are called gufin legabi levushim. In our moshel we had clothes, body, soul. So in Lamaila, the machshava de bumaisa are called the clothes. The esesferis atzilus are called the gufin. The kelim of atzilus are called the gufin, the bodies. And so the levushim amiyuchadim. Bahainu shehein gamkein levushim va'oisius. So you can call them levushim, you can call them oisius. It doesn't matter. But we don't mean levushim and oisius in the ofen of hafrada. Elo shemis achadim ma'oid, but rather they become one and indistinguishable from the oid. And let's just finish the bracket from the original maimon, which this was interrupting. V'lochein nikroim b'shem atzmius v'loi atzmius mamish. But they're still be'ein aroich the gabi the etzem, because we said the etzem is an eir poshut mufshut mikol tzir gashmi. As the keichas hanefesh are mitziyarim, they're muchulakim, they're mugdarim. They have all of these qualities. So they're not the atzmius of the nefesh. So similarly too, the kelim of atzilus are not the etzem, but they are levushim hamyuchodim im ha'etzem, hamisachadim im ha'etzem. Ela shehem nikroim b'shem tikunin. But these keiches hanefesh are called tikunin because hanefesh mistakenes umislabeshes bahem. And this is the second point, that not only is the nefesh misachidim ohem, the nefesh is mistakenes umislabeshes bahem. It's improved upon by its enclothing in it. It's fixed by it. It's enhanced. It becomes dressed, as we're going to see what that means. And that's going to be, Be'ezus Hashem, the next hagahot.